All right, I call this meeting to order, and the first item on the agenda is to adopt the minutes, approve the minutes from the last meeting. Do I?
So moved.
Okay. Second. And a second. All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye as well. Okay, and all opposed, say nay. Okay, the order is adopted, and this is an opportunity for any public comment. Seeing none?
Was that you adopted the agenda and the minutes both?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Of course, I was making sure.
All in one motion.
All right, you're efficient.
It was actually Daniel that accomplished that. Yes, good job.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the actuarial audit report, and we'll turn this over to Milliman Actuarial.
Can you cue my walk-up music, Texas A&M fight song? You got that on your phone?
No.
It's a great music.
The Darth Vader song from Star Wars. Oh, yes, I gotta pull up.
Do you want me to jump into it, Sean? Or
I will get you in just a second. I gotta pull it up on this other document real fast, move it over. There we go. All right, Dee, can you see the actuarial audit report?
I can, yes.
Okay. All right.
Ready to go?
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, thank you for your time this morning. Appreciate having us here. My name is Ryan Falls. I work for Milliman. We're an actuarial firm. And we're here today to talk about the results of our actuarial audit. It's an important part of this board's governance. It's part of your statute, I believe, to have this done on a regular basis. Some of you might have been through this before, some of it might be new for you. But it's called an actuarial audit. I really don't like that name. It's really more of an actuarial review is what I would call it. Because normally I think when we think of audits, we think we're ticking off numbers, making sure everything's exactly the same. And if you find there's a finding in a financial audit, that's usually a bad thing, or there's a problem somewhere. But for an actuarial review or an actuarial audit, these are, as y'all probably know, y'all got some of the best actuaries with CAVMAC. So I know you understand this stuff really well. These are very complex processes. I've heard it described as a blizzard of assumptions and methods and procedures that go into your actuarial work and your annual actuarial evaluation. So there's lots of pieces that we take a look at through this actuarial review. And our goal is just, one, to make sure everything seems like it's reasonable, and then to offer some suggestions on ways just to improve the process a little bit each time, just so we can get a little bit better. I mean, that's the goal, to have better written communication so your stakeholders better understand the information, and just to give some suggestions based on our experience, which is a little bit different than your actuaries, just ways to improve the actual evaluation. So that's the goal. So we do have some recommendations, some quote unquote findings, if you will, but as we'll see, the headline result is that everything, your actual evaluation is done reasonably. We're able to reasonably replicate the liabilities, and we thought all the assumptions and methods were reasonable. So I just gave away the farm there. That's the headline, but we'll walk through the weeds a little bit briefly. So yeah, we had the presentations pulled up here, but we also had a full report that if y'all have any questions, if y'all want to dive into the report, we can do that as well. We'll walk through the presentation. Here, we'll go to the next slide. The scope really is to replicate the entire actuarial evaluation process that you recently went through with your actuaries, Kevin McDonald. We looked at the procedures, the assumptions. We started with the same data, same assumptions, same asset information, and basically replicated the actuarial evaluation. And that's what we were hired to do. That was the scope of the actuarial audit. Like I said, everything went smooth. So we'll go to the next slide, and this is the headline result, what you need to take away from this process, and I'll just read it. Based on our review of the census data, the experience study document, liability replication, the actuarial evaluation report, we believe the July 1st, 2024 actuarial evaluation for TRS was reasonable, based on reasonable assumptions and methods, and generally complied with the actuarial standards of practice. So that's what you want out of this process. So, and glad to be able to bring that result to you today. And so what we're going to do is just walk through, just very briefly, like I said, the different facets of our review, and just tell you kind of what the results of that small portion of the audit was. So first of all, the membership data, we took the original data that TRS provided to the actuaries, and then looked at the data, the final data, because there's usually some kind of massaging process on the census data to get it ready to process for the valuation. So we compared those data files and determined that the data used in the valuation was reasonable and closely resembled the original data that came from TRS. On the next slide, the actuarial value of assets. That, if you all recall, you have your trust fund that you have money in the bank and the investments you hold, but for the actuarial valuation purposes, there's a little bit of smoothing that goes on with the investment returns. So there's a 5-year smoothing that, that's used in the actuarial valuation just to kind of 4 years, sorry about that, 4 years. Thank you for that, Sean. So the 4-year asset smoothing that just kind of smooths out some of the ebbs and flows that we know happen in the market every year, just to give the board a little bit longer term vision of the funded status of the plan. So there's a process that it's basically looking at the expected return on the assets and the actual return on the assets, and any difference in there is smoothed over a 4-year period. And as we went through it, there was just a small suggestion we had on how basically the administrative expenses were incorporated into calculating the expected return on the assets compared to the actual return. It's a small little item, but it was just something we encouraged CAVMAC to take a look at for the next valuation. It won't have any kind of material impact on the valuation, just a small adjustment to the expected return calculation.
Chairman, could I ask a question, please?
Surely.
Yes.
Well, while we're talking about this smoothing stuff, you talk about 4-year and 5-year smoothing. Sean, I thought it was like a 3-year smoothing. Are we changing boats midstream or what?
No, Member Brown, we've always used 4-year smoothing. I think some of Ryan's clients use 5-year smoothing, and so he just, he said 5, but then I corrected him. It's 4-year for TRS.
Okay, thank you.
I apologize for the confusion on this book there.
I gave him a hand signal, but it was too late.
I thought you wanted me to throw a curveball. I wasn't sure what your sign for. But yeah, that was 4-year smoothing. I apologize. That was my mistake. So probably the most important slide is the next slide on the liabilities. We were actually able to very closely replicate the liabilities this is basically for each active member, each terminating member, and each annuitant. We replicated the liability calculation for every member of the plan as of July 1st, 2024, and got really, really close. It's hard to get much closer than this with difference in valuation systems and methods and procedures. It can be difficult to replicate to the dollar. And this is very, very good replication, very good result. One of the closest I've been able to do. So we were pleased with that result. On the next slide, funding. And as you all know, your members contribute a fixed percent, the employers contribute a fixed percent, you get some money from the state, and you get the same amount regardless of the funded status of the plan or how the assets are done or anything. That same money comes in every year. But as part of the actuarial evaluation every year, your actuary calculates, we'll call it an actuarially determined contribution. A contribution that's based on the actual funded status of the plan that's calculated to meet a goal that's established by this board. And that's your funding and benefits policy establishes your funding policy. So what the actuary does is calculates this actually determined contribution, and that gives you as a board something to compare your actual contribution to basically see if the contribution you're getting is keeping you on the path that you want to be on. So that's what your funding and benefits policy, and what that policy lays out, this board adopted, maybe not this exact group, but this made as a board policy, was that until the plan is fully funded, your funding policy is to have the plan, to fully fund the plan over a 30-year period. So every year, the actuaries calculate the contribution rate you would need to fully fund the plan over the next 30 years. And then you take that and compare it to what you're actually getting to see if you're on path to paying off the unfunded liability in 30 years. So that's what it's a kind of a line in the sand for you. And so what and the policy goes on to say, once the plan's fully funded and you have a contingency reserve, then the board will shorten that target funding period to be, I believe, 15 years, if If I got that correct. Any more hand signals? I got to Okay, so actuarial best practice has evolved over the last maybe 5 or 10 years to encourage shorter amortization periods, shorter than that 30-year period. And you do have in your policy that once you get fully funded, you'll automatically shorten that. And again, just to reiterate, it doesn't impact your actual contributions. This is for you as a board, it's just a measuring stick to compare your current contribution rate to. So it was our recommendation just to engage in a conversation with your actuary about what it would look like to shorten that amortization period to something shorter, like 25 or 20 years, as a measuring stick for your current contribution rates. Because the way it works, when you amortize the liability over a 30-year period and we're amortizing it over future payroll, it's backloaded. Basically what ends up happening is it's backloaded contributions. And over the short term, if you actually got your 30-year contribution, your unfunded liability would be expected to go up for 5 or 10 years. So it's just not the best funding standard because, again, your unfunded liability would be expected to go up every year, which is not what we want. But if you have a shorter amortization period, that unfunded liability would be expected to go down every year if you were getting a contribution equal to that. So it's a little bit in the weeds, kind of technical item there, but just a conversation that would be productive to have with your actuary about shortening the amortization period in your funding policy right now. Okay, so move on to actuarial assumptions. So again, there's a blizzard of assumptions that go into developing an actual evaluation, how long your people live, how long your people work, their pay increase, how fast their pay is going to increase, what age they'll retire at, what we're going to do, investment return, what we expect to get on the investments. There's a lot of assumptions. And you go through, every 5 years, you go through an actual experience study where you take a step back with your actuary to look at those assumptions and assess what's reasonable and what may need to be updated. So we looked at your current assumptions and looked at the most recent experience study report. We had a couple small comments there just during the next experience study, something for your actuary to look at. One relating to kind of how the payroll growth assumption and the payroll increase assumptions developed. Kind of try to look at the inflation piece separate from the real salary increases over time, kind of try to separate those in their analysis. And then just to look at how the termination retirement decrements developed. But those are things that could be looked at during the next experience study, nothing that needs to be done immediately. And
May I ask a question on that?
absolutely, I'm sorry.
That's right. You're looking at all kinds of demographic potential changes in the future. I was reading something recently that said that in the state of Montana, what we're seeing is an aging of the population, primarily because there's so many people moving in from other states that are already retired, don't have children. Part of the problem is some of the mill levies getting passed, for example. But is that kind of information included in your assumptions? Because it may mean that as our population increases, the number of students that we have actually doesn't, or it remains relatively stable. What's been the experience that we've seen in the past, say, 5 years in that regard?
I mean, I can just kind of, my assessment of what you're saying, I mean, I just don't think that really has an impact on the retirement system, people moving in, because they're not,
Right.
like you said, they're not bringing children into the retirement system, so there's not the demand for teachers. None of them are receiving benefits from the plan, so I don't think that necessarily impacts the plan. I mean, the most important thing would be, like you said, are there families moving in, or is there going to be a need for an increase in the number of teachers? I mean, that's what's going to drive, what would impact the plan the most.
And where do you garner that kind of information from to try and make future projections about the number of students?
What I would say that would be something, I mean, we don't necessarily have that data readily available. I think your Census Bureau or the Department of Education and the state would probably have a better handle on that. And that would be something where we could incorporate, I say we, your actuaries, they do projections for you every year on what the future funded status of the plan is. And you could build in an increase in teachers into that projection to see how that might impact it, or a reduction. I mean, some states are seeing families move out of the state.
Right.
Like New Mexico is one of my clients, and they're in the opposite situation where they have families moving out and the growth, number of students in the state is expected to decrease. So that would then dictate fewer teachers. So we've looked at scenarios where the number of teachers is decreasing over time. But that's important because those teachers are contributing to the system, their employers are contributing on those teachers into the system. And so if you actually have that population decrease, that's less contributions into the system, which could impact the funded status of the plan. So, I mean, those are certainly things, if you feel like there's potential for demographic shifts, particularly with school-age students, I mean, that is something to monitor and keep an eye on. Because you don't have a contribution rate, like I mentioned, that adjusts the funded status of the plan. So let's just say you had a reduction in teachers and the contributions shrunk just because the payroll shrunk. Well, that could have an impact and result in the funded status not improving the way you'd like it to. And so, I mean, that is something to keep your fingers on and to monitor.
Thank you.
Yeah. I apologize for not having one.
Yes, Member Brown.
Yeah, thank you. I had a question about that, looking into the future of shorter amortization periods. We're at 30. In your background, what kind of increments do you see shortening that period? Do you go 2 years less every 2 years? Do you go 5 years less to 25? Give me kind of an overview of what could happen with shorter amortization periods.
That's a good question. So again, it won't immediately impact the contributions to the fund because those are set in statute. Contribution is a percentage of pay, regardless of the funded status of the plan. So it doesn't have an impact on the funding of the plan. It's just your ability to monitor that contribution to make sure it continues to be appropriate. So you're calculating 30-year. So if you went down 2 years for the next 4 years, or you immediately went all the way to 20, it doesn't functionally change anything with the funding of this plan. It just changes the metrics you have at your fingertips as a board to determine if your current contribution is reasonable. I mean, I think what Todd and Brian will speak after me and you can get their opinion on it. I mean, I think my recommendation, if you were my client, would be to continue showing the 30, but put the 20 next to it, like show them both. I mean, there's no reason you can't have two metrics and have the 30-year and 20-year, and maybe that's for a transition period, because you don't want to one day say we're getting way more than the 30-year contribution, and the next year you go to 20-year and you're not, kind of changes your reporting 1 year to the next if you all of a sudden your benchmark ADC is 20 years. So anyway, I might show both of them for a couple years so you have them side by side so it doesn't seem like you pull the rug out on anybody, and then maybe you phase out the 30-year over time. I mean, I think something smooth, like there's not a requirement to do it, so it's just however you think would help facilitate your communication and your stakeholders' understanding over time.
I think that's something that we should probably look at, but that'll be for a future meeting. Thank you for your information.
Sure. The very last slide, we did look at the written report. We had some just suggestions on just very small things that we think could improve the communications. I didn't list them here. They are in our report. They're very small things. Again, this is just the written report. It doesn't change the results at all. It's just how they're communicated in the official actuarial evaluation report. So with that, that's the end of our findings. I'm happy to continue answering questions, but I did want to take a moment and thank Sean and his staff and Kavanaugh McDonald at CapMac that assisted us in our work. It went very smoothly. Everybody worked well together, and it was a great experience.
Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is the CM response.
I was just going to mention that Carrie was able to join and she's online.
Okay,
Currently.
great. Good morning, Carrie.
On mute, but she was. If she's on the bus, traveling somewhere.
Yeah, right.
Good morning, guys. I'm on a bus right now, so I'm just doing about 3 things at once.
Sure, they're all behaving.
Well,
Yeah,
we're
really,
glad
they
you-
are. Look at them.
I think we met for.
That put a smile on all our faces.
Yeah, that's what I said. Two of my two teaching partners, my two teaching partners have been hurt, so it's just been a crazy week. So I've got 3 classes today, and we're having a great day.
We're
But
glad
I'm
you're
riding on
with
the bus,
us.
so I'll listen.
Okay.
Make sure you get them all signed in.
So the CM response?
Yes.
who- Is that for you?
No, that would be Todd and
Oh,
Brian.
okay. Great.
Good morning. So we did receive Ryan's report, and again, I'd just like to reiterate their conclusion that all the assumptions and methodologies are reasonable. They're able to match our results within a pretty tight corridor there. So to be honest, we think it's a good, our responses, we really don't have a response other than it was a good audit, in our opinion. And as professionals, we do believe it's good governance, and it's also required by law to have it done as well. And as professionals, we do enjoy improving, and so we enjoy the commentary that we received throughout the report, and we will take it into account, where we can in the next experience study and the next actual evaluation. So other than that, I really don't need to, we don't have any other comments unless Brian had anything.
No, I think Ryan and Todd have kind of said it, like if you get 10 actuaries in a room and we all do evaluation, you're gonna have 10 different numbers, but with the results that actually showed up here being within 1%, it's extremely close. And so, yeah, we were happy with the work that Millman and Ryan's team did, and look at the information and talk with Sean and staff and see if there's anything we want to improve or if we like how it is. But yeah, otherwise I thought it was a good, smooth audit.
Good, and I'd also like to say, we actually enjoyed working with Ryan and his team. So oftentimes, like you're saying, two actuaries together are, it's not a good situation because, each other are just trying to one-up each other basically. And it was very, but at the end of the day, the audit is to help you guys, not to show who's smarter. So, and so from our standpoint, we think that that's, a very good thing for you guys, so.
Well, while you're here, I'd just like to pick your brain for a moment.
Okay.
Since we're way ahead on schedule anyway. So, given your audit, background and what you do in terms of making assumptions about the future of classroom size, for example, other changes in the way that teaching just goes on in the United States, do you see any major shifts occurring in the next 5 or 10 years?
Well, I don't know about 5 or 10 years, but definitely long term. So I do work in the state of Ohio with the school employees retirement system, and to address that, we've actually, and they're very similar to you because it's a fixed rate plan, just like you guys.
Right.
We've had to lower, we've kind of proactively lowered the payroll growth assumption going forward. And then we also do a risk analysis every year, and we test that, what if we have reductions in future teachers, and what does that, what impact does that have on the sustainability of the plan? And, typically, there is some negative or reductions in, future active members that, that the plan can sustain. But ultimately, if you're talking about like a catastrophic scenario where just the number of students and teachers declines tremendously, the state would have to reevaluate how they're funding the plan, because the funding model wouldn't work anymore after that. So they would have to either come up with an actuarial determined contribution process where, you have a normal cost and a separate amortization policy for your unfunded liability. Kind of similar to what we worked with the parasystems and what they were doing for the law enforcement, the public safety plans over there. But, as you know, or may not be aware of, but the legislature just undid that, so they had actuarial determined contributions for 2 years, and now they've just completely undid it to go back to, this fixed contribution rate policy. So, so that is a concern, and it does have to be monitored, but ultimately, if it becomes a catastrophic problem, you'd have to reevaluate everything.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you.
If we go status quo for the next 21 years, we'll have our unfunded liability paid off, maybe.
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
So then any changes beyond that, we we'd probably be okay. Is that fair?
So, yeah, the closer you are to 100% funded, the more you're able to manage changes in your methodology, so.
And remember, 100% funded is, you're on track. Like, once we hit 100% funded, we have a 0 amortization period. Like, it doesn't mean everything's completely paid for and done. It's just, we are on track. And so you could have a bad year and all of a sudden that jumps back up to 2 or 3. And so.
So things would have to stay status quo essentially forever. Okay.
Forever.
Makes sense.
I had a question about the STARS Act that was just passed and how that may impact what we have going on. So large influx of funding going to schools right now. So teacher salaries are going to substantially increase this next year. Obviously, there's a percentage, so we're going to get more money here next year as a result of that, but then there's also going to be a larger liability in the future. And so I guess I'm just curious how that's going to play out for us.
So, as you said, that's kind of it's a good thing and it's sort of a bad thing because it will increase the liability for the active side of the equation. But in the short term, you're gonna get more contributions in and it's gonna reduce that negative cash flow, meaning for your current retiree payments. So, in the short term, it could help because you won't be spending as much of your assets, to pay benefits. But in the long term, the active population is gonna, ultimately have a higher liability, but that's really only about half or, less than half of the total pot. Most of your liabilities are your current retirees.
So not a large.
Yeah, the other thing I think that's pertinent to the STARS Act is the biggest increase is going to be for the entry-level teachers, right? So they still have their whole career to work.
Right.
So it's not like they're getting this, 10% increase just in the last few years that are used in the calculation of their average final compensation. The conversation I've had with Rob Watson is for the other teachers that are already working, that a little bit of additional funding that's going to get dispersed to them is going to be well below our 110% cap on average final compensation. So I think it's going to be a positive for Montana, for our plan.
For the retirement system.
I think it's going to actually, the benefits are gonna outweigh the additional liability, because the real liability is coming from the people that are just starting, and so their whole career is gonna be based on those higher salaries, and it should work out just fine.
Yeah, they say actuary, because when you start, you have a 0 liability, and so if you're getting a big increase for those members, like, it's a very small percentage of the liability of the total system. Now, if you're getting a 10% increase for those that have been working for 20 years, then it's a much bigger increase, and so,
It's the opposite.
Right.
It's the new teachers that are getting 10% this time.
Yes.
And given that fact, the most important assumption is the rate of return over the course of their careers.
Yeah, do they stay 10 years,
Yeah.
do they stay 20?
Yeah.
Because they get, that pay increase has to go, does the percentages go up? So that would be something to look at too.
Yep.
How long they actually stay in.
Yep.
Yeah, we study this over the experience we do experience studies, but turnover rates are very high for the younger folks, so it's probably, most of those guys are gonna leave and take their money with them, rather than be here in retirement. So that extra money that came in for them from the employer side is actually gonna be retained by the system and be helped to grow, so.
Okay, thank you.
And hasn't the average career gone down in recent years? The average amount of years that a teacher serves?
So it's gone down, but I think that's more of a function that you are hiring older people. You're not hiring 21-year-olds, the average hire age is much higher. It's probably, 20.
Same thing is true in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Okay, let's see. Is there any public comment? No. Okay, seeing none, let's move on to item 4, which is the Executive Director's Report. And Director Graham.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Safe
travels.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Hopefully you're not going through Newark.
All right, let's see, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the board, so we'll
Thank you.
be on
See you
tab
guys.
4. See ya. Tab 4 in your packet, and I'll pull it up on the screen here. I included a legislative update for everyone, and we'll jump to that. It's in your packet. So our House Bill 67 was our housekeeping bill. It passed, the legislature's been signed by the governor, and that was a bill on our behalf, so it's the one that we've been talking about since August. We defined educational services capacity. We require employers to report the substitute teachers and part-time paras that are opt out for that first 210 hours, and we're just tracking it. They don't have to pay contributions. We're just tracking it in our system so that there's not these mistakes where people exceeded that years ago and it was never caught, and then you have to catch up those contributions. It included extra duty service that's not technically in an educational services capacity, is now reportable if it includes student supervision, and some of the examples are listed there, like crossing guards, concession supervisors, things that by themselves weren't reportable to TRS, so they weren't getting salary or service credit for it. If it involves student supervision and they're otherwise a TRS member, they'll report those to us, and it'll make clerks' lives a lot easier. Those are just kind of things that, you know, depending on where, you know, the district, sometimes they report them, sometimes they don't, and if we don't know they're reporting it, we'll come across it either through an audit or when somebody goes to retire, and then it's kind of a mess. We have to refund contributions, and, you know, they don't get credit for that work they're doing. So this will just be better overall for the member and the employer. The other things was, you know, just updating the dates that we're required to use now for required minimum distributions. That's kind of a couple of years old, but we needed to update the date ranges of what year is your required minimum distribution based on the changes that the IRS made. And then we made the change to the language so that it's more clear how we actually calculate a disabled retired member's benefit. If they are disabled, they come back to work and then re-retire, so that we made those changes in statute, and so now we at least know how to calculate it, which is good. Our university system supplemental contribution bill did not pass. It had one hearing, and some decent discussion. They actually, Mark Thane, or Representative Thane from Missoula, did amend it to, instead of ask for all of it to pay it off by 2033, he got an amendment put on there to increase the contribution from 4.72% to 6%, and then he kicked the end date out to when we would be fully funded. They put the amendment on an executive action, and then the next motion to pass the bill failed, and it didn't get out of the first committee.
Excuse me, John.
Yep.
Sean, when we consider that bill in the future, should we in fact ask for smaller increments rather than have it amended in committee? Because that always draws red flags.
We certainly can try that. We've discussed that, and I think about 4 years ago, we may have tried to do that. Yeah, we could take that same approach. I don't think it's reasonable for us to think we're ever gonna get the full amount anyway. So maybe next time around we do that, we bump it up something similar to that, another 1.5% or something, and then just try to tie to whatever date we are at that time projected to be fully funded, and see if we can get a little more traction.
Because we're required to request it be fully funded at some period of time.
We are. The requirement is we're supposed to make a recommendation of what it takes to fully fund that unfunded liability by July 1, 2033. But we could do both. The bill could be to do exactly what Representative Thane did, or similar. And then as part of that testimony, we could tell them, really, in order to pay it off by what's in statute right now, it's out of reach. It's 14-15%. Yeah.
It seems that it's good to keep that number in front of everybody, though, to make them aware of how vast that liability is.
Yeah, it's the other part of it that is good for the legislature to hear is, you know, what happened there is they closed the plan off to TRS. So all new hires for the university system are in essentially a defined contribution plan. And it's kind of a case study of what happens if you do that. Like if they were trying to do that to TRS as a whole or PRS as a whole, yeah, you can set up a DC plan easy enough, but if you don't have that growing payroll continuing in the future, somebody has to make up the difference. And in reality, who's making up the difference for the university system employees is the rest of TRS members and employers in the state of Montana.
Yeah.
Yep. Any other questions on that one?
Why doesn't it ever pass?
At the last time it passed, the last increase was passed in 2007. It's a money thing. I mean, the university system hasn't testified on it the last 3 sessions, or at least maybe 4 sessions in a row. But you know, if the committee asks you, well, how are they going to fund it? I mean, the only way they have to fund it is they have to take that money out of some other programs, unless, you know, the state were to step up and say, you know, this 25 million is for that purpose, and that's not happened, although we do get state general fund contribution of 25 million a year, every year, so.
And Sean, I agree with that question because, I mean, of all sessions, we could have had that done, period, was a session that we have $1 billion slush fund floating around, my opinion.
We did, I mean, well, I can't say for sure we did, but it's looking like the House Bill 924, which I'll get to here, it is going to provide TRS with substantial additional contributions. And I'll talk about it, I guess, when we get to it, but, and a lot of that is state funding, at least the upfront money for the potential for market downturn.
But it's not going towards this unfunded.
It's not targeted, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
It's not targeted to that piece, but that piece is part of our overall unfunded liability that we believe will be paid off in 21 years.
Okay.
Okay, so then House Bill 158, 349, and 359 were all working retiree bills that came through the legislature. They weren't bills that we requested. We were informational on all 3 of them. Myself and the legislative committee, which is Member Trost and Member Brown, we didn't feel that any of them were really onerous on the system, and they just provide a little bit more flexibility for employers to fill vacancies in various areas. So 158, we already have a provision, 1927-32, that allows somebody to come back to work as a retiree if they retired with 27 or more years of service credit. It's for a class 2 or 3 school district, and the employer certifies to us that they advertise the position, and we get confirmation of that from the Office of Public Instruction that they did do that. Then they're able to hire someone. It used to be they could work for 3 years, no limit on the amount they could make, and still receive their full retirement benefit. And so 158 increased that 3 years to 5 years, so it's 2 additional years. Last year, I think we had about 15 or 16 individuals working under this provision, and not all of them had used up all 3 of their years. So you're talking about a really small group of people in a system that has 20,000 active members and 18,000 retired members. House Bill 349 essentially stood up and mirrored that provision that currently exists for school districts for the Office of Public Instruction. So it'll get codified, it'll be a brand new section of law, it'll probably be 1920-735, that's the next one in sequence. But essentially it's all the same things, but now the Office of Public Instruction would be able to do the same. So they would be able to hire someone if they retired for 27 years and they advertise the position, certify they were unable to fill it, they would be able to work for up to 5 years during their lifetime and receive full benefits and no limit on the amount they can earn.
Has OPI reached out to you at all about utilizing that?
I talked to Superintendent Headland a couple times in the hallway, and she said, we need to, and it was effective upon passage and approval, so they have not done one yet, but I'm sure that has plans to do that at some point.
I'd be interested to see if Ron decides to stay
Yeah,
on as
And that's,
deputy.
right, exactly, the current interim deputy, yep. So I'm expecting that to come here shortly.
Okay.
House Bill 359, all that one did in 1927-34 is our break-in service requirement. You remember last session, we reduced that break-in service from 150 calendar days to 120. The only exception to that is for people that have attained retired member status, which means they received a benefit payment, at least one. They can substitute teach for up to 45 days during that 120-day break-in service. This bill added or mentor a newly hired teacher to the exception. So they could pay someone to come in and mentor a newly hired teacher during that, for up to 45 days during that 120-day break. So none of those three we didn't feel were going to hurt the system at all. Obviously, it adds a little bit of flexibility for employers. So we were informational, but the testimony was such that it was obvious it wasn't going to hurt the system, and if they need it, we're okay with it.
Sean, I know we talked about this a little bit when we were talking about these bills, but do we have case law or something, case studies where the IRS has looked at things like this in other states and said, yeah, you're still good, you guys can stay as a qualified plan?
I wouldn't, my response would be, I don't think there's case law on it. Certainly the IRS, it's kind of all over the map across the United States of what is allowed and what isn't allowed. I think their biggest concern is you have to have a break-in service. They've never defined what that break-in service is. They just say that it should be consistent with whatever profession that you're serving. So for us, a 1 month break-in service for everybody doesn't really make sense, because that's not even the full summer vacation, right? You would be able to terminate in May, go back to work in August, and like nothing happened. There are other states that have even looser working retiree laws, and there are other states that have even stricter retiree laws. So
in the middle.
Yeah, we're kind of in the middle. So I don't have a great answer for you. I'm not aware of any case law where they've come down and said anything, and Jim,
I guess it'd be a private letter ruling or something, maybe. I don't know what it would be exactly.
it could be an audit. Like if they decided to audit the system, and it could be a finding that, you have to make some changes, but I'm not aware of any that have done that in anything over the last 20 years.
Is hiring a teacher to mentor a newly hired teacher a pretty standard practice?
I think I think they currently do that with some of their active members, and if you remember when we were discussing this bill, that was one of the questions that Dee asked is, well, why can't they hire an active member? And I think the problem is in real rural districts, there may not be somebody, if there's only 2 or 3 teachers total, and you have a retiree that just left that position, still lives in town.
Yep.
I think it makes sense for them,
Yeah.
why the need is there.
Postal School District has it when they hire people that are already working,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, somewhere like Charlotte wouldn't have someone on staff.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so then, what was this one?
287.
Oh, yeah, so Senate Bill 287 and House Bill 924 ended up being, after many, many amendments, they ended up being pretty much the exact same legislation. Originally, Senate Bill 287 was the governor's proposal. And it included funding for TRS and Impera, an addition, or not, I should say PERS, the Public Employees Retirement System, where they were going to, it started out, it was going to be a 0.2% additional employer contribution each year for 10 years. So it would be 2% over 10 years in additional contributions to the system, plus $300 million set aside for if we experienced 2 years in a row where our inception to date, which is a 31-year number, if it was below our actuarial assumed rate, then we could get up to 25% of that 300 million each year until we got back to the point where the inception to date was above the assumed rate. And then it has additional revenue streams that would come into it as well, and as it ended up, it still does, to where that money can grow if we're never touching it. Not only will it have investment earnings, but it has some trickle over from other boxes that they have set up, other, funds. So how it ended up is in 924, which passed the legislature. It is out, just came out of enrolling. I checked this morning. It's going to be transmitted to the governor likely today or tomorrow. And then he'll have 10 days to either sign it, veto it, or just do nothing and let it become law. And what it ended up doing is it created the Montana Growth and Opportunity Trust, MGOT. And let me scroll. I'm sorry, I haven't been keeping up with my screen here. I'll pull it up on the screen so you can see it. So the projections on what will happen as far as contributions to TRS are a little bit different, because it changed from 0.2% over 10 to 0.1% over 20 years. So we're still gonna get 2%. It's gonna take a little longer to come in, obviously. But I ran those projections out, and it ends up being about 340 million additional contributions to TRS when you get to that 20th year. And at that point, it's about 39 million a year in ongoing contributions if we're still not fully funded. So it's real money that will be coming to TRS over the long term. 924 also, they reduced the initial seed money for the first year. They're gonna do a general fund transfer of 250 million to the pension portion of the Montana Growth and Opportunity Trust, and then an additional 48.2 million next fiscal year, and then an additional 36.8 million the year after that. So there'll be about 320 million in that fund, with the potential for additional volatile revenue to trickle into that, and whatever your investment earnings are. So that, and they put a cap of $1 billion on it. So if it hits $1 billion, at that point, it'll spill over into some other use. But it is going to end up being real money if we ever end up in a position where we would tap into that. I mean, I hope we don't, to be honest with you, but at least it's there for a rainy day.
Is this funding is just for us, or it's for us and Empire?
So that's for both. So the way the triggers are for it, if we certify that for 2 years in a row we didn't meet that assumed rate, or the inception to date is below the assumed rate, I should say, then we have access to up to 25% of the what's ever in there, and so does Empire. So it's about 50. It would be 50% in 1 year if we both certified that we needed it.
I'm a little confused about a couple of details there. First of all, the actuarial assumed rate of return compensation that they would have, would it bring it up to that assumed rate?
So our assumed rate right now is 7.3%.
Right. So you'd say it was 5 for 2 years.
Our inception to date return is about 7.7%. And that's a 31-year number. So it's going to take, a pretty drastic downturn in order to get the inception to date, a 31-year average, to be below the 7.3. But let's say that happened and it dropped us to, our inception to date dropped to 7%.
Okay.
We would have access to up to 25% of whatever's in that MGOT for the pension as a one-time lump sum, for that year, and to bring us up closer to the 7.3 or hopefully above the 7.3.
Okay.
For inception to date. Yep.
Thank you.
So, yeah, and then there's a whole bunch of other stuff in that bill that I'm not gonna try to even attempt to explain.
What if we change the actuarial assumed rate of return?
So then, let's say that if the board were to adopt a lower rate of return, right? Which could be a recommendation out of our next experience, say, I don't know one way or the other, but let's say it did drop, well, then that measuring stick is different, right? Yeah, that's the new, yep. So if we adjust our rate in the future, then that will be the new measuring stick versus the inception to date.
Let's not then.
Well, yeah.
And it's a fine point, but when they say 2 consecutive years, are they talking calendar years or using our fiscal?
Fiscal years, yes. Yep. And then this last bill is pertinent to the conversation we just had with the actuary. Representative Mercer did actually bring legislation forward this last session to make the amortization period in state law 25 years for all of the systems versus what's currently in law for the Impera systems, which is 30 years. For us, you know, the Constitution says that we'll fund it on an actuarially sound basis. Our funding policy speaks to 30 years being actuarially sound basis. We don't currently have anything in state statute that says, you know, that it is 30 or it is something different. His bill would have done that. Since we amortize in 21 years, you know, the legislative committee felt, you know, we could support that bill. Impera supported it as well, but it did not pass the legislature, so. Any questions on any of that legislation?
Only question would be, why would it fail if we support it, they support it, and the legislators are bringing it? Who opposed it?
Nobody opposed it, but it didn't pass. And so what it really, in practice, what that means is, let's say that we decide in, you know, at our August meeting that we should, you know, revise our funding policy and say that we're gonna amortize in 20 years or less. And then, you know, maybe we're right at 20 that first year, then you have a little market downturn and we're at 22. What it means is we would be going to the legislature more often with funding bill requests on our own behalfs because we're over the amortization period that we picked.
Got it.
It doesn't compel them to fully fund us or fund us to that level, it just compels us to ask?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, I think if they put it in state law, I think that they would be more compelled to fully fund us because it's their own law,
Or at
right?
least to get us to the
Yes.
25.
Yes.
Member Brown?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think sometimes too, taking power away from the people who can act quicker than the legislative body that turns over every couple of years, I think was probably one of the reasons. I don't know, I wasn't there, but I'm just guessing that sometimes we can react easier and quicker than they can.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, to your question about the working retiree bills, and maybe it was you board member Trost, about case law or what the standard is. Based on the research I've done in the past, it is very much industry specific, but even system specific, where retirement systems have gone to the IRS asking for guidance, saying, are we playing nice with what you'd like here? But it seems like most people understand you don't want to do that dance and try to, or most systems want to make sure that they're not pushing the boundaries there. And within these laws, to Sean's point, we've generally stayed well outside that summer break period, so.
And speaking of which, is the 120 days, is that consecutive days or is that work days?
It's calendar days.
Calendar
Yes.
days, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, are you done?
So that is it for the legislative update. Are there any other questions or any other discussion we want to do on bills that passed?
I would like to make a comment. I think and I've said it before, but Sean represents us really well in that whole conundrum across the street. I think that having him with years of experience, and I just think it's a real asset for the teachers in the state of Montana.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Well, thank you.
Yep.
And let's go to, so I guess moving on then to the operations update. Lexi, newcomer, is in the audience, and Darla, as part of her communications manager report, will introduce Lexi and bring her up to the table. But Lexi replaced Jennifer Van Sickle, who left TRS for a job in the private sector. But Lexi has a background in graphic design, outreach, and technical writing, and so we're happy to have her on board. And that is the only staffing update I have for the board at this meeting.
Welcome, Lexi. You have a very appropriate name for this position.
Exactly.
Okay, well, this is an opportunity for the public to make any comments. Are there any? Okay, seeing none, we can move on to the communication manager's report. And that would be Darla. And Lexi.
This chair feels, I feel like I'm at the kids' table.
Kind of looks that way.
Okay, I won't read the whole report to you, but, Mr. Chair, members of the board, I'll just give you a quick, summary of things that have happened over the last year, and then a little bit of looking forward, what we plan to do. As mentioned, we have a newcomer on staff, Lexi. As you recall, you all met Jen. She was here just over a year, which is just at the point where you know enough about TRS. You can start doing some things independently. She did what was best for her family and career, and we respect that, and that's great for her. And luckily, our next round of applicants was equally qualified. Both times when we've hired this position, we've ended up with some really good candidates, so that was a real relief, because you all remember after COVID, the number of applications we were receiving, us and everybody else, I think, was pretty slim, so we were pretty pleased with the pool. So Lexi has some background in state government and other stuff, and I'll let her tell you as much or as little about herself as she wants.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, thank you so much for the opportunity to introduce myself. Like Darla said, my name is Lexi Newcomer. I hail from the great city of Great Falls, Montana, graduating from CMR High School in 2014. Go Wrestlers. I studied psychology at the University of Montana and graphic design and web development at North Idaho College. In my career, I began in the nonprofit world, so getting a lot of experience in outreach, technical writing. I've created many a handbook and a website, and I love things like that. Once I switched over to state government, I had the honor of serving the legislature, both in the services division and the House of Representatives, one of the greatest honors of my life. I also worked for the Office of the Public Defender in their HR department, so I've had a wide array of experience, and I feel very honored to serve the members of TRS because my mother was an educator here in Montana, and I've had the benefit of experiencing the wonderful educators we have in our state, and I just feel very fortunate to be able to give back to them. And I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to hit the ground running, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
She's already hit the ground running. Yeah, we were really lucky to have her. She told us in her interview that her reason for leaving the Office of the Public Defender was nothing to do with the department. She just didn't think HR was her thing, and she'd rather be doing the kind of stuff in our job description, so that was wonderful.
Given the fact that your mother was a teacher, I imagine you had to get your homework done right up front every evening.
Oh, yes, and she sat me at the table and made sure that happened.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And I didn't even realize she had not only attended UM, but was in the marching band, as I was, and I swear there was no bias in hiring her. So that was pretty cool. So she's here. She's been willing to do everything from fun projects like using the Beyond animation software that I don't know if some of you will remember that we had a little animated video, just kind of a basic what TRS is, and it was, 4 or 5 years old, 4 years old, I think. So it's time to refresh that. So she's been playing with things like that, and also doing more mundane things like issuing a big mailing the other day for legislative updates. We send out a bulletin to all the employers. For things like that, we send it by both mail and email. So she was a huge help with that. So far, so good. I'm really glad to hear she's as eager to be here as we're eager to have her. So all good. Some of the outreach activities that we're we typically do every year and we'll be doing again this year, is Nolan will be presenting to MASBO next month. And the legislative updates are a big part of that, so we were scrambling the past few days to get the presentations updated. So we'll be doing that in June. It happens to be at Great Falls, so, and Lexi will be joining us there just to get some face-to-face introduction with some of the district clerks and business officers. That'll be nice to have that exposure to the employers. As you all know too, Chris Fish, our internal auditor, has been uncovering a lot of really good information and paying for her own position many times over. But how that impacts our world in the communications area is that if she uncovers a common problem, and often it's something we already know is a problem, but Chris's audits confirm it, like failure to report extra duty service correctly, or the substitute teaching issue where there was no way for us to track hours, and so they weren't activating their membership in a timely manner. That triggers new fact sheets, new procedural information, bulletins to the employers, that kind of thing. So we have been working on things like that a lot, which is really good. We're increasing that little library of fact sheets. And then of course the legislative session always increases our workload as well, just keeping the website up to date and putting together updates for you, updates for the employers, that sort of thing. As far as member outreach this year, I always update the TRS 101 and Ready, Set, Retire presentations each year, but as we told you at the past couple of meetings, attendance at those in-person presentations was really low this past fall. And our active team, Jonelle Sedlock and her benefit officers, are always really, really busy. So for them to drop what they're doing and travel out to 6 cities across the state it ended up not being a good use of their time. So as you already know, and I think you agreed with, we are going to focus more on webinars because that attendance has been quite good. So we'll do that, and then we will still travel to the annual MFP Educator Conference in October, but just for one day. We're not going to do hotel rooms and all that stuff. We'll just travel for one day. I did put in a request to present one session of each of those 2 presentations instead of 2 of each. And I asked for them to be on the same day. We haven't yet received our where we are in their agenda, but hopefully it will come out the way we hope. And we'll just go over there and do those presentations. It's really nice to be able to meet with members, and so we don't want to drop it entirely. It's a good opportunity to get in front.
Where is it?
It's in Missoula this year.
It's in Missoula this year.
That's correct. So, but we will be, again, taking Lexi with us to that, so she can have some exposure to how those conferences go. And we're not having a booth this year, which is kind of a bummer. It's kind of fun to sit there and answer people's questions, but I'm thinking we may still bring some sort of a flyer advertising more webinars and ask if they would be willing to let that crowd know that there will be webinars. So, and then we have another issue of the newsletter coming up. I've actually submitted the request to State Print and Mail for a quote, even though I don't have it drafted yet. But we need to get on their calendar, being this close to the end of the fiscal year. So we'll get that shortly and we'll start working on that. And it, of course, will be mostly a legislative update issue. That's what legislative year, the May, June bulletin is usually mostly about what has changed in the legislature.
Darla, when you send out those newsletters, do you notice an influx of responding calls from members?
There are some. Sometimes it's funny little things like people that are upset that it costs money to print those. But we only issue 2 in legislative years and 1 issue in a non-legislative year, so we feel like spending 50 cents per member.
So do you give them the option of taking their own name off the list?
Yes, absolutely, and they can switch to email delivery.
Sure.
It's curious to me how few have done that though. We've offered that option dozens and dozens of times in every issue, but there's only, I think, 21 or 2,200 out of 35,000 people that receive that newsletter. that have said, yeah, put me on the email list, although it has increased a little bit. But yeah, and then sometimes, I don't know, I think Sean probably gets a call or two on, you know, maybe a legislative question or funding questions, that sort of thing.
Right.
But yeah, typically it's, sometimes we'll even get a nice letter thanking us for, the surveys are big and we'll have another survey this year, so I hope to be able to put a link to that.
Seems to me that that process might be a little bit age-specific, because some of us old people, like, is still holding a real
Yeah,
newspaper,
right.
as opposed to, getting our news from
I'm
the
even,
internet.
yeah, I mean, I guess I am getting older, but
Yeah.
I like having a real newsletter in my hand.
Right.
And then we could put a nice photo in it and all that stuff, so.
A question, Mr. Chair?
Yes, Member Brown?
Is there a way that we could, and maybe it's already being done, that we could put a link on OPI's website so that teachers going there could, just one more click?
A link to the survey or a newsletter?
Well, to our page and to interesting factoids that we're sending out via email?
Ooh, I don't know. What do you think, Sean?
Possibly, I don't know. I mean, it's possible. I mean, we have all of those things on our own website, and
Right.
I mean, I don't know. It would just depend whether they want to put our content on their website or not. I don't know.
Yeah.
Can't speak to that.
Yeah.
All right, just an idea, thanks.
Yeah, and MFPE typically has been our biggest supporter as far as getting the word out about surveys and that sort of thing. So as I mentioned that's at the end of this report, actually, we do hope to work with them again and see if they can help, because they have email lists of all their members that mostly overlap with ours. So we don't necessarily have a recent email address for all members. So it's not easy at all for us to do a blast email to all members and let them know about a survey. The newsletter remains the main vehicle for that. So I mentioned forms, fact sheets, and web content. That is a big part of our job, and Lexi will be taking on a lot of that once we get the new website rolled out. And I should back up a little bit and give you an update on that, because with Jen's departure, it had fallen back to me to learn how to use that Cascade CMS tool. So both Lexi and I have done some online courses that SITSD put together. And again, because Jen was very helpful in creating that website, but was also new to TRS, some of the content in there needs quite a bit of revision. She charged forward. I'm so grateful that she did, to just get it built, get it designed, and she put content where she thought it belonged, but there's still a lot of review. So having to step back and bring a new person on has slowed that process down. I'll just be honest. It just takes, especially with the legislative session going on, there's just a lot of other priorities. So the hope is to get that website content reviewed, some of the structural things figured out and improved before we roll it out. It's a lot easier to fix things before it goes live than after. So that's our hope, to have that done later in the summer. So new website design is still in the works. It's just been delayed because of everything that's going on. And then excuse me.
Yes, Member Brown?
Mr. Chair, I'm just sitting here thinking, again, is there a way we could request, and maybe it's privacy stuff, but could we request from the school districts the list, that edu.com list for the employees that belong to the TRS?
I suppose we could. I don't know that would be very useful, because what happens now is employers can send in, when they hire a new member and report their wages for the first time, the file can include their email address. But the one they know is the one that is tied to their employment at that school district. And they change so often and people come and go that having the school email list hasn't proven to be all that useful. It just changes too often. I have a friend named Virginia that has worked for 6 or 7 different employers. And so whenever I need to go look at an active member in our system to use as an example, I use her. And for years and years, she still had an East Helena email address, but she hadn't taught there in about 10 years.
Okay,
So I kept
thank
telling
you.
her, you need to go update.
Well, and I can
So-
add to that too, like, right now MFP is pushing that to schools because it keeps coming up in legislature that they don't want the district office or payroll to take out the dues and have all that happen. It's gonna all happen away from the district office, so like our district office will have no idea who's a member and who's not, because it will be coming out of a different, it won't be coming out at the district office anymore. So even if she asked, the district office wouldn't know.
Yeah,
I'm
thanks.
always a little bit leery of using someone's email for a purpose they didn't know was going to be used for. Like, for example, the emails that we have in our system, the only thing that someone can opt out of is the newsletter. They can't sign up for getting all their TRS communications through email. So the way our system is built, it's really always been characterized as, we'll use your email address for the newsletter if you tell us we can. And then if they're emailing John L. or one of the other benefit officers, of course, that can happen, but it's always, we don't just blast out emails for any old topic. I try to respect their choice about, do they want the newsletter electronically or on paper? And then beyond that, I don't like using their email address.
May I ask you both another question? At this point, I'm quite sure that all of us have had the various experiences with websites, some positive, mostly negative, of trying to navigate through a website and get the information efficiently and expediently as you wish.
Right.
And I assume that this Cascade platform training that you've been doing is to help you comprehend how that system is structured. Up to this point, have you been impressed with the efficacy of the system?
Yes, Cascade CMS is really a platform. It's a sandbox, if you will, that it's a defined structure for all state websites. So you can't stray from the approved structure too much. We were not even sure in the beginning we could use our own colors and our own design elements. We were able to get that approved. We keep hearing that eventually the template that the governor's website, I think I showed that to some of you who were on the board a couple of years ago. It works great for the governor's office. It wouldn't have worked great for us. But anyway, Cascade CMS, the platform itself, is here's the elements you can use. You cannot stray from them. So we've had to mostly learn how it functions. It's a bit like WordPress, if anybody's used WordPress, but not quite that way.
A particular interest to me is our teachers being able to go in and enter assumptions about their income and their potential years of service to try to predict what their eventual benefit would be in a fairly simple fashion.
Well, that's not the public website though. That's within my TRS, which is the secure member portal. We have had that for years.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So the public website is just so that all state agencies or the university system also uses that platform so that all university system websites look and behave similarly. So that only affects the public website, but at the same time, John and Tammy are working hard, and I'm involved a little bit in taking the member portal, my TRS, and making it responsive so that at least if they're on a mobile phone, it's not, you've all seen how right now it's a fixed width, you can't.
Right.
So in that sense, it will be affecting my TRS, but that functionality that you mentioned is already there.
Thank you.
Member Chair, I just have one comment in regards to email addresses that Member Brown was mentioning. We do collect that information from school districts on their monthly contribution report, and that information is updated on limited circumstances, meaning if the individual has a MyTRS account, they're responsible for their own and keeping their email address updated. We also update that information from that contribution report if the person is new to that employer, their name, they existed in the system for at least 60 days. We collect that information, we will update that information. So we do have a means of collecting it and the most recent, and if the person has a MyTRS account, they're responsible for that. And then in regards to the active benefit recipients, the MyTRS benefit recipient, John has doing a great job in using Cascade, well, not Cascade CMS, but he's actually in the process of actually making it responsive, and I think it's going to be very nice. It looks nice based upon the global documentation that we just actually literally finalized yesterday, as a matter of fact. So it's going to be nice. It'll look nice on a mobile phone, so.
Great, thank you.
And the email issue too, I always explain to our members that enrollment in TRS is essentially passive. It happens through employers reporting wages for somebody. And we don't have a way to compel anyone to give us a different address, like my friend Virginia. Please go update, you log into my TRS and update your information, and it's just not something they think about doing. So we don't have a legal way or otherwise, any other way to really make that happen except to keep asking and keep reminding people in the newsletter. But that's the, small potatoes to them. They're worried about bigger things, I think.
And not all 300 and plus employers, actually, their payroll systems, not all payroll systems provide us that information, but for the ones that do, we will update that information if it meets our, rules that we have in place, and the person does not have a MyTRS account.
We also find that, especially on the employer side of things, they do change their email providers frequently. So if it was, East Helena Public Schools.k12.mt.us, that's all different now. And so my friend Virginia's address was not only outdated, it was representing whatever email system they used 15 years ago. So it's always a challenge. One more thing I'll mention in here is I have a little section on DocuSign adoption. Unfortunately, because we're part of an enterprise agreement, we're all dependent on the state being able to renegotiate that agreement. So here we are again, April, May, it's the time of year where they're trying to renegotiate this agreement. But there's decisions to be made internally yet. If assuming the agreement continues,
Have they raised the price?
Pardon me?
Have they raised the price?
I have no idea.
We don't.
Probably,
Okay.
most everything increases, but the identity verification, abbreviated as IDV in here, is the feature we were going to use where someone could take a picture of their ID and upload it through DocuSign, through the process of withdrawing their funds. And DocuSign has, I think they use LexisNexis behind the scenes, and they can do some looking to make sure that driver's license number matches something in government records and it doesn't look like it's been photoshopped, that sort of thing. But it just has to be set up. We have not yet had an opportunity to make progress on that with everything else going on, so.
Could that take the place of documents that we have to have notarized now?
Yes, that's
Absolutely, that's the goal,
Yep. So I think that pretty much covers what we have been doing, what we're planning to do. If there's any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And this is another opportunity for public comment. And there being none, I don't think we need a motion to take a break, do we?
I think you just make the announcement.
Okay, I announce that we take a 15-minute break and come back here at 5 minutes after 10.
All right.
Okay, we're gonna call the meeting back to order. And the first order of business is administrative business, and we're gonna turn this over for our investment report to Mr. Dan Trost.
Okay, thank you. Met recently with the Board of Investments and went over a number of things. The main ones that I'll talk about, once a year we look at capital market assumptions from our vendor RVK. And it's always kind of a depressing exercise because we look at what they think returns will be on every asset class that you can invest in. And most of them, I think it looks like about 90% of them are under our actuarial hurdle. However, historically, we've done better than these. I'm pretty skeptical about these. I think the general idea that US equities, the valuations are high. Even after the declines we've seen recently, valuations are still high relative to earnings. So the forward look is that returns will be lower in the future than they've been in the past a little bit. But we have a pretty good allocation to international private equity private debt, real estate, and some things where we've historically done a lot better than the capital market assumptions. And I hope and sort of assume that we'll continue to be able to do that going forward. Any questions on that? The next thing we talked about was benchmarks, so we look at those once a year too. It's a pretty good discussion every year. A lot of them are obvious. You've got US stocks, it's the S&P 500, and so it's easy to say that's a great benchmark and we don't want to mess around with those. The really hard ones are the private assets because there really aren't good options. It's such a wide variety of things that are included in private equity that you'd have to use a blended benchmark of a bunch of different things. And so we've kind of looked at it more as almost like a hurdle, like, hey, if we can't do at least as well as small cap US equity, then we shouldn't be in this. And so we've used that as our benchmark for a really long time. It's not great because small cap US equity, when markets go down, it goes down significantly. When markets go up, it goes up significantly. And private assets stay flat because they're not valued on a daily or minutely basis.
Right.
And so it's not a great benchmark, but we can't come up with something else that will be better necessarily. So it's on the agenda to dig into that a little bit more, a couple of the new board, and it happens every time we get a new board member who's got some investment experience. They're like, well, this is dumb. Why are we using this benchmark? And then we go through the whole process and we often end up back in the same place. So we'll see how it ends up on that one. But most of the benchmarks are easy. It's, in terms of returns here lately, obviously, Sean said earlier, we're still above the long-term return assumption. It's been kind of rough, especially with US stocks. We've done relatively well. We've been saying for 25 years that an allocation to international is going to be awesome, and it finally is. International is way above US right now because the dollar's been devalued so much here recently. I think it's almost a 20% delta between international stocks and US stocks. So this is a time when it's really nice to have that diversification.
Has that allocation been discussed being increased?
A little bit. That's a different meeting when we talk about our sort of our midpoint on our range. And everything is pretty darn close to the midpoint. There's a bigger meeting about asset allocation that's upcoming. We don't do anything really, quickly. It's like, oh, international looks good, let's jump in. It's really, it's much more measured and
very gradual.
Yeah, very, very gradual. What else? Talked a lot about legislation. Sean did a great job of updating us on that. I think that's about it.
Any questions? Thank you, Mr. Trost, appreciate that. Okay, and moving on now to Nolan and his year-to-date financial statement and budget report.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the board. We're looking at page 34, and that's where the balance sheet starts here. And these are as of March 31st. I actually just finished the April 30th reports here, but we didn't have them in time to get them in the board packet, of course. This is a one-year look back compared to, the quarter ended March 31st, or the fiscal year ended March 31st. And the first thing you'll notice, I guess, on the balance sheet is, just because of timing, there's that, major negative cash flow. That's just a timing issue when we sell STIP at the very end of the month, to pay out benefits. And if that transaction doesn't happen, in the perfect timing, then we end up with a really large negative cash at the end. So that's kind of throwing some things off. I mean, you'll see like the total investments, it shows that we're, are up about 260 million, but in reality, the total assets are up about 230 million from, because of that negative 30 million in the cash. So, unless there's any questions, I mean, everything else is pretty straightforward on the balance sheet. Last year at March 31st, 2024, we had about 5 billion and a little over 5 billion in total assets, and we're sitting at March 31st of 2025 at 5.26 billion or so. And you can see our year-to-date income is about $100 million as of March 31st. And it was real close to that last year. I know last year in fiscal year 2025, fiscal year 2024, we finished the year really strong. Like May and June had really good returns. The market had really good returns, and so I obviously April wasn't as good, April, May of this year wasn't nearly as good as April, May of 2024, so you'll see that, as we approach at the end of the fiscal year. The fund balance statement, we have revenue, that's where you'll see our revenue over expenses of the 100 million, which was very similar to where we were at last year. Our contributions are always, pretty much in line. We continually get more contributions each year as our payroll grows. And then also our benefit payments continue to go up each year. But everything else looks pretty similar. I mean, we do have a little bit more withdrawals this year than we did at this point last year. Any questions on any of the balance sheet, fund balance statement?
No, just a brief comment. The only reason the revenue over expenses is slightly lower than it was the previous fiscal year is because the previous fiscal year's the net investment return was higher than it is for this fiscal year. So if that wouldn't have been the case, the revenue over expenses would actually be higher.
Yeah, I mean, we did do this as of, like I said, April 30th. I just finished this. We're showing these as of March 31st, but if you include all of April, I mean, we're actually at like a negative 7 million for revenue over expenses. So we're actually in the red as of April 30th. So April was a rough month, for everything. But you still have May and June, and the first part of May is better, so we'll see. So the investment revenue by sources and expenses by sources, this kind of breaks those categories down a little bit. I mean, it looks like very similar in the overall investment revenue to where we were at last year at this time. And then the expenses, same thing. I mean, the main difference there is last year we were still amortizing that M-Trust project, and so that 170,000 is no longer included in this fiscal year. So, any questions on anything? Moving on to the budget status report. As we get closer to the end of the fiscal year, it's much easier to kind of project, what kind of surplus or deficit we may be ending up with. I say surplus or deficit, but we pretty much always project surplus, which is good. So this year, I mean, as of March 31st, I have like the 140,000 roughly estimated for a budget surplus. As of April 30th, it actually is probably gonna end up somewhere in the 150 to 200,000 range for a surplus, so we're not gonna spend, nearly as much as we had budgeted, which is a good thing. Any questions on any of the budget status? I mean, you can see that, our personal service surplus is mostly, we had some positions open, during the year for periods of time. Right now, we're fully staffed, so, but that's mainly what that surplus comes from in the personal services. And then, some of our big categories of why we have a surplus in our operating is like our AMA contract, we budget like 95,000 for additional enhancements each year. We've only spent like 8,000 or 12,000, something like that. So I mean, we're gonna have a large surplus there in that particular category. And then legal services, we've spent a couple $100 on legal services, and we always budget like 30-some thousand, cause those add up really fast if we do need to utilize those, so. And that's really, this next page just kind of breaks down one of our major categories, that's the contracted services. So you can see the 62136, the IT consulting and professional services, that's where we budget for, those enhancements for Intrust and then our maintenance contract and our project manager for Intrust. So we budget, 359,000, we've only spent like 50% of that, and we're 75% through the fiscal year, as of March 31st, so that's like, a big portion, and then obviously the legal fees up there at 62108, those are those categories. We budgeted 37,000, we've spent $113. Those are good things, so.
Yes.
And that's really all I had. I mean, this delinquent agency report was prepared as of the beginning of April. Since then, our Hart Butte Public Schools has submitted all their reports, and so yeah, we're kind of caught up on all the delinquent agencies.
Well, if they are late over a certain period of time, which we haven't had much of a problem with that for the last 2 or 3 years, is there an interest fee?
There's not, we don't charge any penalties or interest. We haven't had a huge issue with schools, getting their contributions reported, so.
This one seems to be a frequent flyer.
Yeah, they are, there are certain, and it does tend to be, certain schools that, you kind of repeat offenders, but.
I remember though, 5-6 years ago, we used to have a list of 4 or 5 or 6 school districts all the time on this list. But that's pretty much gone away. What do you account for that?
Well, we have a process, or I have a process that I go through, after the 15th of the month, that's when their reports are due. So if we're talking about the March report, by the 15th of April, that March report is due to TRS, and so at some time real shortly after the 15th of the month, I'll send out an email to anyone who hasn't, submitted those reports. Then I follow up with that a few days later with a follow-up email, and then I start calling schools, and then if none of that works, then I start calling superintendents, and, the very worst cases, we get, like Jim would get involved, and we'll send a letter to the county attorney, the school board members, and they all, so that usually gets someone to say, hey, what's going on, so that all has, I think, helped a bunch, to make sure that everyone's paying in a timely fashion. We're always gonna have, with 360 employers, you're gonna have a few people that get it in on the 17th or 18th of the month instead of by the 15th, but we wouldn't wanna, I don't know how the board feels, but it might cause more of a burden on staff to start charging interest and fees, and unless there was a major issue, so.
And, Mr. Chair, members of the board, in 2018, I think it was, which would have been, you would have thought would have exacerbated the issue, we actually made a system enhancement to require and do similar to like what PERS is doing, and require a monthly report every month, not just, September through May or June. So that has not exacerbated the issue, but if they don't have anything in, June, July, August, they are required to do a $0 report and report to us. So every month, their report is due.
So they stay in the habit.
Yep.
Yeah, and what that allows, there was a small, time frame where if they didn't have you kind of had to, it was a guessing game on who should have had a July report and.
Which one was their final
Yeah.
report and which is, when are they
So
gonna start
that, this
reporting?
eliminates that problem.
Yeah, it eliminated that problem of, if you didn't have anyone to report, you still have to, report something or acknowledge that you don't have contributions.
And that process is relatively simple for a $0 report. I mean,
Yeah,
literally
it's
it's
quick and easy.
a couple of clicks and they can submit a $0 report for the summers if need be.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions?
Nope.
Okay,
Am I staying up here for the?
So,
we could move that forward and just let
well,
them.
I think we can still, just stay there. Well, we can still do the personnel committee report and then do the budget committee report. Which initially you and Brian will comment. And then,
Right.
And then the question is for the board, then, is that the point where you wanna walk through all of the budget request information so that when you get down to action item, all you do is have a motion and vote, or do you wanna wait and go through it all at that point? It's up to you. I mean, it's probably better for discussion if we go through it, under D.
Yeah.
Okay. So just stay there.
Okay, so we'll move on to the personnel committee report, and we'll have a report from Carrie Elliott, and Elliott Crump, who's closely related to Elliott.
Missed an eye in there.
Yes.
Thanks for pointing.
Yeah, I haven't ever been called that or seen it spelled quite like that. Is Carrie still on, or is she?
Yeah, I think she's off. She's not. We have D and Dave Severson are the only two.
Okay. All right. So we had an opportunity, Carrie and I, to meet with Sean. We met April. What's that?
Sorry, and Tammy. You met with me and Tammy both.
Yeah, both Sean and I.
Yes,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
To discuss the salaries for our employees. We met at the end of last month, April 23rd, and spent about an hour kind of understanding that process and why we need to make some adjustments. Have a report here that I'd like to read through, and then if there's questions, we can get those things answered. So the Personnel Committee recommends a $75,527 in base salary adjustments to implement the 2024 board or broadband market rates. And for performance retention purposes, 16 out of the 23 staff members would receive an increase in base salary ranging from 0.3% to 7.7% prior to the legislative increase of $1 or 2.5%, whichever is greater. These increases are necessary to move our staff closer to market rates for their specific job classifications. These adjustments consider each position's market ratio after the legislative increase of $1 or 2.5%. No personnel committee increases are included for any positions that are at or above 110% of the market after the legislative increase. Generally, but not always, due to internal equity, TRS hires new staff members at approximately 90% of the market. With satisfactory job performance, we try to move them to 95% of the market after 1 year, 100% of market by 3 years, and 105% of the market by 10 years, and 110% of the market by 15 or more years in the same position. The state's adoption of Broadband 25 in fiscal year 2020 has limited our ability to follow these guidelines because the market rates for positions increased or decreased substantially to the point that the executive staff at TRS recommended that we wait to see if the market rates would normalize to some degree with the 2022 market survey, the most recently 2024 market survey. Virtually no adjustments have been requested for the last 4 years outside of the legislative increases passed by House Bill 13 during the 2021 and 2023 legislative sessions. The 2024 Broadband 25 market rates are as normalized as they're going to get at this point, and failure to start moving positions toward the market rate will likely result in vacancies and loss of staff expertise as other state agencies continue to implement market rates. Even with the adjustments requested in the package, Our benefit specialists, 1 and 2 positions will be below 90% of the market. However, this request is moving them in the right direction. The committee recommends including $75,527 in the fiscal year 2026 budget for these salary adjustments. Did you want to touch base on what that broadband information is? I know we spent a lot of time when we were in the committee talking about what that is and why we make that change.
Sure, I'll give like a kind of a general overview. So the state operated under what was called Broadband 20 for approximately 20 years. And that used to be the pay plan and the survey, all of the salaries for state employees were based off of that same pay plan. And they did the salary survey on the positions the same way for a real long, consistent amount of time. And TRS was in really good position against Broadband 20 because obviously it had been in place for a long time, and we were able to have what we used to call target market ratios for staff based on their years of service and whether or not they were performing, obviously. But we would, would follow something similar to what Elliot read there, where, we try to bring them in at 90%, after a year get them to 95, after 3 years get them to 100% of market. I mean, we don't really have many positions here at all that take more than, if you don't have it mastered in 3 years, like there's probably other problems, right? So our feeling under Broadband 20 was, we want to be paying the market rate. And just to be clear, the market rate, that's not the top of the market. That is the midpoint of the market. So when we say 100% of the market, it's 100% of the midpoint. It's not the maximum or the minimum, obviously. So that was in place through 2020. In 2020, as Governor Bullock was going out and Governor Gianforte was coming in, they switched over to what they call Broadband 25, and they compressed some job classifications. I would say they did that more so than not. They went to like 3 different steps in most like job classifications versus before there were more, I guess, choices of how you classified individuals. And what that did is it really, like for some positions, that were at, say, 100% of market under Broadband 20, all of a sudden they're at 120% of market. Or maybe they were at 100% and they dropped all the way down to 80% of market. And so generally speaking, 80% of market is the minimum under the state's pay plan policy, that everyone is supposed to be at least at 80% of the market. And then 120% is the maximum. We decided, and because we were in a pretty good position on Broadband 20, we felt, Tammy and I did, through our recommendations, and the Personnel Committee agreed, the first 2 years, or first 2 cycles, so the 2020 and then the 2022 Broadband 25 market surveys, we thought, let's wait and see if these kind of, normalize a bit, and they have to some degree. After being in place now for 4 years, this will be the next 5th and 6th year based on the 2024 markets. But I think we're in a position now where we need to start, it's not going to change much after this point. It's going to be small. Every 2 years, they're going to update the market, and they should be, fairly stable, small adjustments like it used to be under Broadband 20, now that we're that far into it. And I can tell you that the governor's office got funding for all of these agencies that are budgeted agencies, which we're not. Our budget is approved by this board. We don't go up to the legislature and get our budget approved. But they got a fair amount of funding for the governor's office of budget and program planning to divvy up between those type of agencies over this next 2-year period to address market rates. So we're kind of following suit with that, but I don't want to put us in a position where, somebody can just move across the street and make, 20% more. We're only asking for at a maximum of 7.7% before the legislative increase. We're trying to keep it within reason, but we want to try to retain our staff we have. So that's kind of the history on Broadband 20 and the change to Broadband 25.
Sean, forgive me my geeky math question, but when you talk about median to establish the market, here's an example, if there's 10 teachers and 9 of them are making 50,000 and one of them's making 40, the midpoint is 45, but the average is closer to 50. So is it actually an average, or is it actually the median in terms of the range of teachers that are in that market position?
They call it a median, so I assume it's in the middle, but it's not just a Montana, it's a Northwest United States survey
Okay.
for similar positions. I mean, and it's something that the state HR does every 2 years.
So we don't really have any control of that anyway.
We don't have any control over the survey itself, no, or, you know, how that midpoint lands, but yeah, they call it I guess they call it the midpoint, not median, midpoint,
Yeah.
so, yeah.
To Dan's point, the midpoint would be halfway between 45 and 50, but the median and the mean and the mode are all 50 in that example.
Right, it's mid, because they, for every job classification, they'll list the
The
minimum.
lowest and the highest.
And then they'll list the maximum, so 80, say it's
probably a
80
pretty
and a
even
120.
distribution, though.
Probably.
Yeah, it is fairly even distribution.
That's why I asked you to forgive the geeky.
Yeah, no, yeah, and I think I was saying median, it's the, you know, it's the midpoint in the range is what they consider 100% of market. So it's not, and what I was trying to point out, it's not that we're asking for really the maximum of that market when we say 100%.
Right.
So when the new study came out, it was much higher than you expected, is that?
For some positions, and for others, it was much lower. Yeah, so we were, like I said, we were in very good shape as far as like what percentage of market our folks were under broadband 20, you know, based on the targets we had, and overnight, like you may have been at 100% of market, now you're at 80 or 85% of market, or maybe you jumped all the way to 120% of market. So, and it has normalized a little bit, you know, it's definitely stable, at least we know this is really.
There's always changes in the definitions of what you do relative to what's out there too, right? So is that part of the problem?
Yeah, there are, and to the extent that we add additional duties or, you know, complicate make a position more complicated, we can ask for that to be reclassified, and then, you know, HR will come in and they'll review how all the changes versus what they were doing previously, and then they could, you know, reclassify them into a different job classification code, which then would result in a different market for that individual too.
Okay.
But you don't have to change what their job is called.
Not necessarily, no. Its technical classification title would be different, but not necessarily what TRS calls it, yeah.
Okay.
And we haven't done any of that, so
No, I was just curious, if you're throwing all these numbers and terms around, then did my job change and the name of it changed all at the same time?
Yeah, no, it could or
Right.
it may not, yeah.
Yeah, typically the working title remains the same, but the classification title is X, Y, or Z, whatever
Yeah.
you fall into.
Okay, that makes sense.
Thank you, Member Crowe. Appreciate that. By the way, your name is spelled properly on the agenda. Okay, so moving on to the Budget Committee report and budget justification. Brian, would you like to take over?
A little bit, yeah, we had our meeting, seems not that long ago, on the 28th. We went through some of the line items with our group. The one question that popped up in my head as we were going, the contracted services, if the DocuSign, would that change?
No, because it would be through ITSD, it would be part of our enterprise, our cost to.
So that just stays,
That
wouldn't change,
be under
yeah.
contracted service.
So they highlighted a few things, there's a few things there in yellow that we had to have discussion. The biggest part would be to build off of, Member Crump, is the increase in salaries is one of the bigger increases on this budget, but with their recommendation, we really had no questions on that part of it, so. Other than that, it's pretty self-explanatory. Some things disappear and reappear as I'm learning this process with contracted services with different things that happen. That seems to be why the budget goes up and down, but it's very well put together. I love spreadsheets, so going through these is good. And any questions that need to be answered would have to be asked.
And I'll just reiterate. Yes, Member Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want, you don't use names or anything, but I'm curious about the 23% increase. I get, you know, that 2 or 3 or maybe 7, but you mentioned a 23% increase. What kind of job would that be?
What, I guess,
Full-time equivalent employees, that's the number of employees, not a percentage.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, top line. Full-time equivalent employees.
That's the, FTE, so no change to our FTE from 25 to 26, 23.
Yeah, that simply is, that's not a percentage, that's just the number of employees
Yeah,
total.
that's personnel.
Yeah, it's called the
I
Michael
misunderstood.
Jordan Group.
Thank you.
Sure.
Chairman, members of the board, without going into each line item, you can see kind of at the bottom of each category, it shows, the fiscal year 25 approved budget, and then the fiscal year 26 request is kind of 2 over, and then the percent increase or decrease. And those are all bold on the spreadsheet. And then at the very bottom of the entire justification, I guess it'd be on page 52 of your packet, you can see that, our total administrative, I guess the amount that we are requesting is the 4.346, which represents a little less than 8% increase from the previous board approved budget of 2025. You can see some stuff below that shows, by statute, we're allowed to spend up to 1.5% of our benefit payments. In fiscal year 24, our benefit payments were 440 million. Our admin expenses for fiscal year 24 were 3.69 million. And that represents about a 0.83 percentage. So we're a little, just barely over half of what we're actually allowed to spend by statute. So some of that actually includes some depreciation that we have no control over, that will eventually be completely amortized or depreciated. And so we'll be closer to that 0.8% once that's all fully amortized or depreciated.
Just a brief comment. I have been looking at these reports for 10 years now. And Mr. Youngren, Member Youngren has been looking at them just a short amount of time, but we're both committed to doing our due diligence and looking at line items. But it becomes an interesting exercise because they do such a good job with this report that we end up just basically rubber stamping it at the end, because try as we might, it's very difficult to find any mistakes or concerns in their overall budget report. So I think they do an incredibly good job. Thank you, Nolan. Okay, so let us move forward to the tentative 2025 meeting dates. Or do you want to do the, what do you do? Sorry?
No. So do you want Nolan to kind of walk through this? I provided a pretty good summary in your packet.
You did.
A written summary as far as by category, what the percentage changes were, either up or down, and the overall change. I guess I just want to make sure that everyone on the board feels like they've had enough opportunity to discuss this before we move, because we
need a motion.
Next, after a couple more agenda items, we'll need a motion to actually adopt it. But right now, we're still on D, which is the Budget Committee report and discussion, so.
Does anybody have any questions on that budget report before we move forward?
I just have a general one. The 1.5% of benefits paid is statutory. That's our max, is that right?
Correct.
How does that compare to other systems out there? Do we have any clue? I mean, should we really be patting ourselves on the back that we're only using half of what is allocated to us? Or is that typical of other systems? Does anyone know the?
I recall asking Todd and Brian that a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And they told me that the 1.5% was fairly standard. There were some states that actually had higher provisions.
And they were using it all?
They're using much more of it than we are, typically.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
By the way, the 0.83 that we were at, I can't actually remember the reasons, Nolan, but there was some expense in there that had brought that up a little bit that is going away. in this next fiscal year, and you expect?
Yeah, you can kind of see on that page 52, you know, so of that 3.69 million in administrative expenses in fiscal year 24, 170,000 was the amortization of M-Trust, which is fully amortized now, that phase 2 project. And then also we have depreciation expense for the they're called leasehold improvements, which is when we purchased, or when we leased this space, we did a whole bunch of remodeling. And so that's being depreciated, I should say, each year. And that's that 34,000. So once this is fully M-Trust in fiscal year 25, you'll have a zero amortization expense because it's been fully amortized. And then once these depreciation expenses have been fully depreciated, we should be closer to that, without those, it'd be like 3.4 million, which would get us closer to like 0.78. So I mean, I would expect us to be in the 0.75 to 0.8, 0.85. I mean, it's just in that range, but we're still well below the 1.5% of benefits paid that we're allowed to spend. I mean, keep in mind that our benefit payments go up fairly significantly each year, because we're paying our retirees more, so.
Right. Here's an M-Trust question, maybe a couple. So we own that software, correct?
We own the code, yes.
We own the code. And I have to think that was a incredibly good decision, however many years ago we did that, versus buying something off the shelf or, well, I guess licensing something. Have we ever looked back at that and said, well, what are other systems paying for their software and how good of a deal? It has to be just the best deal we ever made,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, it is.
Yes.
For sure. I mean, our total build out on it was around like 4 million, something like that. And our annual maintenance fee is 144,000. And I believe upstairs, their annual maintenance fee is closer to 300,000 a year. And their build out's more like 15 million. And they're not really that happy with it. So I think, and
Does most systems out there just build their own like this, or is there some other way to do this, licensing through?
There are what they call off-the-shelf products.
Yeah.
The problem is they all require so much customizable programming that
It's almost the same as
they're not really an off-the-shelf product. And that's what Impera did upstairs, is they went with a company called Sagitech, who had the product, but you have to then make it fit your laws, everything about it. So, for TRS did well with having Alfred and Roy, who were our previous providers, kind of start with that as the base and modernize it and update the code. And then obviously we enhanced it tremendously in the process.
Yeah, so I know we're just getting done with amortizing that, but it was a huge benefit to our members.
Yeah, I've been working with Alfred since 1993. I started in April of 93. We converted from pension gold to pension plus in September of 93, and he's been our contractor since then and very knowledgeable. I mean, we looked, prior to Sean becoming the executive director, when Dave Sen was here, we looked at PeopleSoft and we actually went down that path of customizing that, and it was a horrible decision.
Yeah.
And when we had the chance to look at what Impera's doing and other off-the-shelf systems, we looked at stuff, but we were like, both Dave and Sen and I were on the same page. It was like, I won't say what we thought, but no.
What was the year that we made the decision to go with M-Trust? I'm trying to remember, because I think I was here.
We started in 2012 and officially kicked off the first phase.
Yeah, I remember all this.
2013, yep. We did a pilot to say that, because payroll was the toughest module, and that was the decision that Alpha was able and Roy were able to convert, pension plus payroll module to, Cold Fusion, and and it's been.
Well, you spent a lot of your career time on this, so good work.
Oh, thank you very much. It's been, I love it. It's been a wonderful thing to do for TRS and our members. And I enjoy it. And I think we're definitely getting our money's worth, like Sean said.
Absolutely.
We're spending $12,000 a month in maintenance, and just to give you some idea, Alfred is the kind of guy, I've been able to call him no matter what it is, and he'll say, I can do that, I can take care of it. And a lot of that stuff he takes care of under that maintenance contract, when a lot of contractors would have said, okay, I need a PCR.
Is he training someone?
I was just gonna ask.
Well, that's the
What's his
thing.
transition?
Yeah.
There, unless he brings on a partner that's obviously younger. The good thing is, I mean, we're not gonna be able to replace his, institutional knowledge of building it now twice fully, right?
Yeah.
But it's written in language that programmers use now, so it's probably gonna take two different people to kind of do the same thing as what he's doing.
Okay.
It doesn't mean necessarily that that it would have to be in-house people though. At some point, like, he could sell his business, because we own our copy of that code, but he also owns, his copy. So he could.
Are they licensing that to any other systems?
They're not currently, but that certainly would be something, if I were him, I would explore,
Yeah.
because it's worth a lot of money.
Yeah.
He has attempted to do that, I know, at least once, because I was a part of looking at, the information he was putting together for the request for proposal. Yeah, so, all right.
That's cool.
But if there's
I'm
anything else,
just
I'll
glad
say.
that somebody loves that stuff.
I do.
You and me both.
To bring it full circle back to the budget report, we were able to re-sign a contract with Alfred this year for that same $144,000 a year, and that's good through June 30th of 2028. So I mean,
Good.
Yeah.
Foreseeable future. Okay. Okay, let's move on to tentative meeting dates, August 1st, October 3rd, and December 5th. Does anybody have conflicts with any of those? I have a conflict with December 5th. I'll be on a boat going through the American Canal.
The American Canal.
So the only thing I would say is the August meeting, obviously is our next meeting, we want that to be firm, and then October 3rd is, somewhat immovable, because we coordinate our meeting with Impera, and the actuaries are coming to provide valuation results for both us and Impera on the 2nd and 3rd.
So August 1st is good for everyone?
I might have a conflict August 1st, but if everybody else can do it, I probably can call in.
Okay. And how about October 3rd? Looks good?
I'll be in Salt Lake City for the NCTR,
Okay.
but I can call in.
Okay?
Okay.
If
And
we
those
did
two
it
are
in the
good.
second, I'd be there.
So the only problem with that would be it's the Impera's meeting. I mean, we could schedule it, because they'll be here. We could schedule our meeting and just make sure that the actuaries don't overlap. I mean, that's a possibility.
Oh, you don't have to move it for me. I'm just saying that, I mean, I can do it remotely, but I'll be flying probably that day.
Okay.
I'm not able to attend the 2nd
The 2nd of October.
of October.
Okay. So it's 5 of 1. No, 6 of 1. Okay, so let's just leave it October 3rd. And if you
Okay.
can make it by Zoom, that's great. Otherwise,
All right.
enjoy your flight.
All right.
Okay, and how about December 5th? Any other conflicts besides me?
As far as I know.
Okay. And unfortunately, I'll be gone from the 17th of November until the 23rd of December, so. Yeah,
Oh, so your conflict's a big one.
a big one.
4 months, huh?
Yeah. Get back just in time for Santa. Okay,
Can we just leave that one then too on the 5th?
yeah. It's theoretically possible I could join you by Zoom, but I'd prefer not to. Okay, all right, well, those are good. the next several action items, I'm assuming here, correct me if I'm wrong, are all simply things that we need to ask questions about if we have any questions, and if not, we're gonna entertain a motion to approve them all
After public
Public
comment.
comment?
after public comment.
No, right now.
Yeah, right. So we'll open it up now to public comment. I'm not used to this. Does anybody have any comment? No. There being none, let's move on to the action items.
I'd like to introduce this first one.
Okay.
Just because it is a little bit of a change.
Okay,
Okay, all right, so the first action is to set the interest rate credited to member accounts. And if you had a chance to read my write-up, you'll see in there, and let me pull up the actual charts so you can see what the averages look like. This is by month for the current fiscal year. It's trending down somewhat, but it's still, you know, above currently we're at 4.25% for the interest credited member accounts. Let me go to the next one. This is by completed fiscal year, and with 25 sort of year to date, it's at about, 4.83%. Typically, what we've always done is set the rate, we project a little bit, like kind of what it looks like it's gonna happen between now and the end of the fiscal year. And we try to set the rate, close to what we think STIP is going to end up for the fiscal year, because once we set it this May, this is the rate that people get on their contributions for the entire next fiscal year. As I pointed out in my write-up, Impera recently in January, they have a policy for setting their rate, their interest credited to member accounts. And they updated their policy to say that it will be the lesser of 2.5% or whatever the STIP rate is. So the reason they did that, and if those of you that were here might remember, Trost asked me this question a couple of years ago because we jumped from about less than 1% to 4% in a year. And it was like, well, that's, my response at that time is, well, that's how we've always done it. We set it close to the STIP rate, we're in theory, at least we're making that much or more. But we've been paying out a substantial amount of interest to these member accounts that's really not the purpose of those funds. Those funds shouldn't be outperforming a high yield savings account. We want them to stay. We want them to attain the years of membership necessary to retire, not have a high yield savings account for those that are only here for a few years and leave. So my recommendation would be, and I guess just so you all know, TRS does not currently have a policy. We have state law that says the board shall set the rate annually for the interest credited to member accounts. And there's really no guardrails on that. So it's up to you as a board to decide what that should be. My recommendation would be for us to follow suit with what Impera did. Right now, it's higher than 2.5, but my recommendation would be to set it at 2.5%. And then if we want to, and this is where the discussion part comes in on the board's behalf, Jim has drafted a policy that we could look at in August as our initial review if we want to put guardrails on it that says it's, the lesser of 2.5 or STIP. Or we could continue doing it the way we do it, where, I compile this information, make a recommendation, and then it's up to the board to have the discussion and decide where to put it, as far as to set that rate.
I've been thinking about this a lot, and especially since our meeting last October with the actuaries, when I asked Todd, what do you normally see out there? And he said they see caps of 1.5 or 2. And so I think 2.5 is too high, probably. I mean, there's no reason in my mind that we should benefit folks that don't stay long enough to get vested at all. Those aren't our constituency. So if that cap was even lower than 2.5, I would be for that.
I concur. I think we should err on the side of being conservative at this point. There's a great deal of moving parts in our future, including what Federal Reserve may or may not do, including the effects of inflation on what the Federal Reserve will do. I agree completely. I think I'd be more comfortable with 2.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I would concur with that, but are we talking about putting these guardrails at whichever is less 2% or STIP?
Yes. That's what I would say.
All right.
Any,
So do
Any
we
other-
need a policy written up so we can vote on it in August?
So my answer for that would be, you don't need a policy to vote today to set it for next fiscal year. And strictly speaking, you don't need a policy. I think I mean, my recommendation would be for us to go ahead and adopt a policy. And Jim, like I said, has one drafted. We'll have an initial review of that policy in August, and then you would adopt it at the October meeting.
So, Mr. Chair, are we, do you ask for concurrence on that 2%?
Yes.
yes, I think
Yeah,
it's-
I mean, I agree, there's no use if someone's in for 5 years, they should benefit from, like you guys said, a savings account, basically, high yield. You're not gonna get that at a bank.
right. Okay, this requires a motion, I believe.
It does.
Would anyone like to propose a motion?
Yeah, I move that we set it today at 2% for the next fiscal year, and that we have management draft some sort of a policy to say that, at least to have the discussion that we might want to cap it in the future, in the way that PRS did.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. Motion carries. Okay, we want to entertain motions on each of these individually, or did you say we could put them all on?
I would say
Probably.
individually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so is there a motion on the table to renew the Ice Miller contract or discussion and questions? Then we would entertain a motion to renew the Ice Miller contract.
Motion to
So
approve?
moved, Mr. Chair.
Great. And do we have a second?
No second.
Perfect. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Sorry, Member Brown, I was a little quick there. Was that an aye?
Yeah,
Okay. And those opposed? Being none, the motion carries. Next order of business is to renew the AMA contract, the M Trust Maintenance Agreement. Is there any questions or discussion? Okay, we would entertain a motion to renew the the AMA contract.
So
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
aye.
And those opposed? There being none, that motion carries. Fiscal year 2026 TRS budget request. We would entertain a motion to approve that budget request.
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second,
All those in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. And those opposed? There being none, that motion carries. Do we need a motion for out of
Can I
state?
talk to this one?
Of course.
Okay, so under,
You're the chairman, you can talk about whatever you want.
well, I need some input from you all as board. So, item K is out-of-state travel for TRS board members to attend the NCTR Summer Trustee Workshop. This year, that workshop will be held at the Raymond Mason School of Business at William and Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia, July 13th through the 16th. And so what I'm asking you to do here as far as an action item is if we could have a discussion and find out if any or all or however many of you might be able to attend this conference this year. We'll just get approval for that many to attend, and then I'll start making your arrangements as far as registering for the conference and reserving your hotel room. So, Dee, have you been to a summer trustee workshop? I know Carrie's been to
yes.
several. They're really, I mean, do you want to speak to how
You know,
educational they are?
I think a lot of it is you find out across the nation what works and what doesn't work and what they're working on as far as teacher retirement systems go. The networking, the people I always like to see. I'm sorry that I can't attend this one because I know it's going to be good. I'm going to be out of state that week, but I would encourage as many who could go as possible.
July what?
July 13th to the 16th.
Yeah, July 13th through the 16th.
I'd have to do some digging, but.
Okay, but you're a maybe. And so if we approve the budget enough for 4 of you to go and only 2 of you go, that's fine. It's just a matter of let's get the approval and then I'll follow up with you to make the arrangements.
I can tell you there's no way I can go. I have 30 people coming to my house for my 25th anniversary on the 15th.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I will not be able to.
Okay. Okay.
So that means a
You're gonna
maximum of 3. Us 3 can't go. Oh, D can't go
Yeah,
also. Okay.
so maybe do approval for 2 and then I'll just follow up with you.
Sure.
To see. Okay.
All right, I move that we approve the budget for 2 people to attend the NCTR trustee workshop this summer.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And those opposed, say nay. There being none, that motion carries. Okay, what's relevant about the next meeting on August 1st that you'd like to discuss?
So August 1st, August is our strategic planning meeting and we are due for kind of the more full-on strategic planning discussion and meeting this year. So we'll have Jim Cairns will help facilitate that meeting. If you remember last August, we adopted a strategic plan basically for the next 2 years. So last August was just kind of a quick review, make sure we didn't have any big priority changes and we kind of just moved on. This next August will be a more kind of, I hate to say start from scratch because we don't literally start from scratch, but we will adopt a new strategic plan and a new strategic planning commitment worksheet. So we'll have that, and it sounds like we'll potentially review a policy for interest credited member accounts, as well as maybe a couple other sort of general business things, but it's truly that meeting is for strategic planning.
All right, given the fact that we're running a little over and we still have a fair amount of work done, I have a couple questions. Are there any disability applications we're actually going to be reviewing?
There's 3,
Okay.
but no one is attending.
Then on my own behalf and everybody else's, I'm going to suggest we take an additional 5-minute break. We'll call the meeting back to order, and we're going to do board training with Mr. Jim
Malizia.
I'll have that down soon.
You would have been closer probably than most, so. So Chair Chamberlain, members of the board, for the record, Jim Malizia. We're doing a training today on the TRS policy of non-discrimination in employment and the provision of services. As a starting point, have you all received non-discrimination training from your employers?
Yes.
Okay. If you desired something more in depth, D of A offers training which we use. This is more specific to the TRS policy. For the purposes of the TRS policy, this training covers both TRS employment processes and the provision of services for our members and staff. First, this is not a standalone policy. This TRS policy incorporates the statewide EEO, non-discrimination and harassment prevention policy, and the Montana Human Rights Act. These are very broad and cover more specific subject matter than the TRS policy. You may ask, well, why do we need one if there's already a broader, all-encompassing policy that we need to follow and incorporate? Well, the governmental standards of fair practice of Montana, which is part of the Human Rights Act, requires that each entity have their own policy. And you're not in compliance with the Human Rights Act unless we have that. This essentially exists not only to make sure that we're all properly educated on these matters, but to make the point that ignorance is not an excuse. We need to be on point. There's no wiggle room for people stepping out of bounds in these matters. So who's protected from discrimination? That's anyone in a protected class, which, as you'll find in a moment, is very expansive. That includes discrimination is prohibited against anyone based on race, color, national origin, age, physical or mental disability, marital status, religion, creed, gender, sexual orientation, including sexual identity, political beliefs, genetic information, veteran status, culture, social origin, or ancestry. As far as age discrimination goes, in Montana, you can't discriminate whether you think someone's too old or too young. That's where on the federal level, it's 40 or older. And onto the policy, we'll start with number 1. This policy covers what we can't do. We can't discriminate or harass individuals perceived to be of a protected class in the hiring or employment of TRS staff and the provision of services. It will not be tolerated. Harassment is not something that will necessarily result in an adverse employment action or determination on an individual, but it is equally unacceptable as discrimination. It's when workplace conduct toward a person, like inappropriate comments, stalking, actions, create a hostile work environment by making it untenable for a reasonable person to continue in the position or work productively. 2, only merit can be considered in employment matters like hiring, firing, promotions, and raises. No decisions can be made because of class perception. 3, TRS will not discriminate in fulfilling our agency mission to provide services or benefits as a retirement system. An individual's protected status will only be considered to the extent that the law requires to determine qualification for services and benefits that we provide. 4, TRS will not retaliate against any individuals for standing up against discriminatory practices or harassment. In other words, a person will not face adverse employment action for opposing discrimination, filing a complaint, or participating in the remediation process, whether that's an investigation or making a report. In fact, we're legally required to help all of our members and our staff know how to make a complaint, and it's posted in our kitchen. It's also on page 3 of this policy. 5, TRS will also make sure these policies are incorporated into all of our third-party contracts and subcontracts that we participate in. 6, TRS will develop and implement a program and training to make sure staff is educated on discriminatory conduct, harassment, ADA compliance, and retaliation. We can use trainings and procedures provided by other agencies, and we do, through the D of A. 7, we must periodically review our TRS employment practices and operations to identify if any discriminatory conduct is occurring and remediate any issues we find. This all must be documented. And as a practical matter, if someone wants to make a complaint, they should first go to their direct supervisor, or if that's untenable, go up the chain of command. If for whatever reason someone felt uncomfortable doing that internally, they can go to D of A HR, or if there was some extreme circumstance, they could directly file a lawsuit. However, it often might work to an individual's benefit to start at the lowest rung of the totem pole, because sometimes issues can be fixed without any further issue for that individual. Other times, things need to be escalated. With that, if you have any questions, please let me know.
So, Mr. Chair, so do you guys have someone in the office that's a point person that's just assigned, like that's your go-to when you want to have that complaint, or is it just the supervisor?
We don't have a specific person. Like Jim said, typically,
Right.
you would start with your supervisor, but if the complaint was against that supervisor,
Right.
then they would go up the chain either to Tammy or to myself. Or if it were against one of us, at that point, they might go directly to HR.
HR,
Yeah.
okay.
Do we have any history of having had such complaints?
Not since I've been here. I don't know, Tammy, since you've been here.
No.
Yeah. Good. It's a long, good history.
It's all the board training we do.
Exactly. Well, thank you, that was
Yeah.
very efficient.
And something I could say, and it is a general matter, having worked in some places that might dance in the hostile work environment territory, this is a very pleasant place to work, as is upstairs. I think people are very thoughtful as far as the well-being of their coworkers and how we respect each other's space.
Yes.
It looks like the policy was signed by our board chair about 10 years ago.
Yes.
Is that often enough?
So we review it every year though.
Okay.
I mean, if we had something we wanted to change, like if there were legislative changes that would require us to change it, we would do that.
Okay.
Well, I'm still so glad that they can't discriminate based on age.
Okay, well, thanks again, and moving on, it's still your floor, as we're going to have the legal counsel's report.
Sure. Well, we don't have any pending legal issues to present to you at this time, nor do I have anything before me that indicates something is imminent. However, this doesn't mean activity has come to a halt in the legal office. In Montana, we have to rely on laws passed by the legislature or statutes, and the laws that we use to enforce those statutes with administrative rules. I'm bringing this to your attention because in coming weeks, you may receive notification of pending rule changes, and this is not without your approval. Back in August 2021, the board approved a cleanup package of rules for rules that were unclear, maybe disconnected from present statute or duplicative. And due to basically a systemic change with software that was being implemented to publish these rules and the notice process, that got held up, the publication of these approved rules. And this system is finally up and running in a clean and effective way. So I've consulted with Sean to review the changes that were approved back then and understand what's in there, what's going forward. And I've been working with the Secretary of State's office to get the publication process, the notice process started. So in the next month or two, you might be getting notice of those things, and this is nothing that's outside of the ordinary for the state. And our procedures, it's just that this was something that was approved a while ago, so it's getting rebooted. There might be another cleanup package coming later in the year as I've reviewed some things and notes left from Denise. But this is all standard operating procedure and nothing to be concerned about. With that, is there any questions you may have about that process or anything else that comes to mind?
No?
Okay. And one other thing I have to say as far as the question about the conversation of the communications work, the fact sheets, the forms that came up earlier, I have to say for my onboarding process, it was not only were they very helpful and effective, but having surveyed a lot of retirement system websites throughout the country, just for other reasons, our website and our approach is very intuitive, the way things are listed, and the fact sheets and the forms educate individuals in a way that I've been very impressed with, and as I've gotten to learn our specific statutes are in lockstep and pretty well managed. So I think we're doing a strong service to our members with those things.
Thank you very much. Okay, next agenda item is applications and benefit adjustments, and there's a list of retiring teachers.
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the board, the report's provided for your information, and during this last quarter, we retired 64 individuals with approximately 15 years of service and close to age 60. Any questions? This is, of course, we're starting to get in our busiest time of year, and so May, June, July, August will be a lot more.
Yeah.
We retire 600 plus, and the majority of them are during that time frame. So.
Thank you, Tammy. Okay, long-range planning. is that for you?
Yes,
Director Grant?
yeah, so, Mr. Chair, members of the board, as we previously discussed, this strategic planning spreadsheet is now almost a full 2 years old, so it's, getting a little bit stale. A lot of the things have already been completed. We still have some things that have come up through discussion, like, finishing the responsive web design, bringing on DocuSign and getting to a point where we're moving away from wet notarizations. Those kinds of things are still in process. We'll certainly be discussing probably all of those again in August. There's a chance that our responsive web design will be out or very close to being out by then, but certainly the identity verification pieces and things like that, we will continue to discuss and continue to work towards getting those implemented. I'll just kind of touch on a few of the things, anything that's new or changed as far as the dates, I updated in August. And the first one there's at the bottom of the page where, responsive web design, I think we're shooting now. We were hoping to roll it out in May. It's looking like more like by the end of August, we're gonna be able to roll that out if everything goes well for us. Like Darla said, the backbone is there. It's really now a matter of getting the content where we want it to be and make sure everything's accurate and we're not misleading anyone or, down the wrong path. On page 2, I've mentioned this already, so at our August meeting, we will conduct formal strategic planning. And like I said, Jim Cairns will help us through that process as he's done in the past. It's always a good exercise for the board to go through, and it's a good exercise for staff as well, to make sure that our priorities are all aligned as we move into the next biennium. Let's see, and then, I just already guess I'm stealing all my own thunder here. So yeah, OWA is the online withdrawal application. We were hoping to have identity verification in place for that during this current strategic plan, and it's looking like we're going to do that in earnest as soon as we roll out the new web design in August. We'll next jump to online withdrawals and that identity verification piece so that we can get rid of the need for notarization of those documents. So by next fall, we should have made some good progress on that, I would assume.
And Sean, can I just say one thing? We won't be getting rid of that notarization piece in its entirety. We're gonna still leave it out there if they fail the IDB. So that coding and all that will still remain. It's just, we'll provide them that opportunity.
That's a good point, because they could, for whatever reason, I mean, I've had it where even just uploading a passport, it won't take your picture 3 or 4 times. And if people get sick of doing that existing functionality where you go print the notarization page and have it done manually would still exist.
Well, some people aren't gonna wanna do it electronically.
They may not. Yeah. And if they don't, I think the people that go through the process of doing an online withdrawal, most of them are gonna be willing to do that identity verification piece. Otherwise, they'll just call our office and we'll send them a paper form anyway, if they don't wanna do any of the electronic. So I think we'll get some pretty good mileage out of it. And really, it's gonna be step 1 for TRS on electronic identity verification that then can be incorporated into other functions as well, like eventually an online retirement application. So hopefully by the time you retire, Brian, we'll be all online.
Depends on what offer comes in, might be sooner than you think.
Do we know if it's a flat cost or is it per verification?
The price we have, the structure we have right now is by envelope. And we currently have access to envelopes, but you only get charged for them if you use them, and we're not using them yet. And so what's up in the air right now is whether or not it's gonna still continue to be an enterprise agreement where we get allocated so many envelopes by the state of Montana. And typically those are cheaper than if we just go contract as an individual agency. And that's the part that's under negotiations. All right, let's see, I don't know if there's a whole lot more as far as updates, nothing else in red. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I guess I can answer any questions that the board might have, but as I stated earlier, we're going to give this a redo in August.
Thank you very much. All right, for the next part of the meeting, we need to close it to the public and discuss disability applications. Okay, we will entertain a motion for the first one under consideration, Jack Parent.
Move approval?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Member
I
Brown,
move that we approve the disability for Jack Parent.
you can second.
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Aye as well. And all those opposed? There being none, the motion to approve the disability request for Jack Parent is approved. And now we will entertain a motion for the second disability applicant, Natalie Buckman.
Move to approve.
Second?
Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye as well. And those opposed? There being none, the motion to approve the disability request for Natalie Buckman is approved. The third motion that we would entertain is for Tamara Van Sickle.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. All those in favor of approving the disability request for Tamara Van Sickle, please say aye.
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 Aye. And those opposed? Since I hear all your voices, it's fairly clear there's no nays. The motion for the disability request of Tamara Van Sickle has been approved.
You have me?
Thank you.
We'll go this way.
Okay, we would entertain one more motion for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye.